Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Blue Republican Radio with Robin Koerner. It's good to have you with me in the midst of these interesting times. This rise of American fascism is not funny anymore, is it? It's kind of getting a little bit serious now. A couple of weekends ago, I had the pleasure of attending the International Students for Liberty conference in Washington, D.C., where I had the pleasure of sitting down with Jeffrey Tucker. And if you're a regular listener to this show, you know that Jeffrey Tucker is one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite libertarians. I've interviewed him on the show actually 6 times, I think, over the 2 or 3 years we've been going. But in D.C., I had the chance to sit down and have a discussion with him that was on video. And if you go to YouTube and stick the words, I don't know, Tucker Koerner into the search box, I suspect the 45-minute show that I did with him on anarchism versus minarchism will come up. We had a great discussion. It was kind of billed as a debate, but Jeffrey and I don't really, we don't have arguments. We just kind of bring the best out of each other. We have a bit of intellectual chemistry, you might say, and it was a lot of fun. And I urge you to listen to it. You're going to enjoy it. If you're interested in, just in America, but certainly if you're interested in American liberty, the politics of our times, and if you're interested in anarchism and or minarchism, check out that video. And by the way, shout out to Jason Stapleton of the Jason Stapleton program, who I've also, by the way, interviewed on the show for doing the recording. Jeffrey and I actually recorded the 45-minute segment in front of a Jason Stapleton banner, which you will also see if you listen to that. But anyway, the reason I mention all of this is that for 6 of those 45 minutes, Jeffrey and I talked about the current rise of, let's just call it American fascism or American authoritarianism. And I want to play for you the audio of that 6 minutes of that show that Jeffrey and I did. Here it is.
Well, let's see, we had speech controls in World War I, and we had speech controls in the 1790s. So there's a long tradition of Americans. Americans. But here's the thing. So Trump says this. He also says, let me have your iPhones. Let's collect all your iPhones. I want to look at your selfies and your texts, all right? And so you'd think people would say, down to you, tyrant. No. On the contrary, they love it. They're cheering him. Wild applause. The more despotism, the better. The more tyrannical you talk, the more we love you.
Because, yes.
Pay attention. Yeah. Pay attention to what's going on out there. There's a real danger. And Americans, this is a funny country. We have had red scares in this country now for 100 years. The commies are coming, Keeps happening again and again and again. We are unprepared for the anti-left, brown-shirted despotism that we're facing now as a very real prospect. We are unprepared intellectually and unprepared psychologically. We don't even see it when it's right in front of us. Hayek said this about Germany. He said 10 years before Hitler took power, nobody even imagined. Right. And it's fascinating because Hitler didn't have a lot of uncritical fans. He just had a lot of people who thought, well, he's the best. We've got a lot of problems we've got to deal with. He seems like the one who's best able to deal with it. Same thing they're saying about Trump. This is how a country collapses into the total state. It's just the paradigm's there.
Are you scared? Are you scared right now?
More so than I've ever been in my life.
Right.
Yeah. But, Robin, I find myself, and I try not to be this way, I'm alarmed at the extent to which people are, especially libertarians, are unprepared to recognize the threat that's in their midst. Mm. And I'm not sure if you've seen this or not, or discerned this, or if it alarms you. But many of the people who, over the last 10 years, have been considered themselves part of the liberty movement are now being sucked into this vortex. And I keep asking myself, why?
But
why?
The answer to that, surely, is that we retrofit our political views to what we're culturally comfortable with.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to be part of a movement, it might be called the liberty movement. What you really want to be is anti-establishment, is different, is have some means to experience yourself as more intellectual than the next guy.
It's like,
you could pin your colours on the liberty mast 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But actually, you think you believe that, but it's a cultural affinity. It's not actually an intellectual one.
I wonder if you're right about that. I wonder if that's right. I'd have to think about that. It's a very interesting thing. And the other question is really,
well, that's certainly what's going on with Trump and his supporters, surely. It's a cultural affinity.
He's like us.
Yeah. And a lot of those folks, like, who are voting for him, let's say who voted for George Bush, were, when Bush was campaigning, were saying they supported a very different politics.
Right.
Because remember, Bush didn't campaign as he governed.
Yeah.
Right? So the views change with the perceived moral authority.
Yeah.
And you connect, you identify with the moral authority more in a cultural way rather than intellectual.
Well, and it lures you into a kind of the worst possible way of thinking. And it's simple the way it happens. Like, for example, Trump stands up and says, down with the liberal media. And we go, yeah, I hate the freaking New York Times. He goes, they're horrible people. And you're like, yeah, they've been horrible to me for years. I can't stand that paper and the way that's left. He says, we really should shut them down. And you're like, yeah, let's shut them down. And it's like, we really should have a rule against saying the kind of things that they say. And we're like, yeah, pretty much. Well, next thing you know, the pillar of liberalism is gone. Knocked out. Free speech.
Because people want to feel what that feels like, to say it and hear it and shit. They're not building their politics out of
fundamental principles.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a politics of loathing and hatred, and resentment and backlash.
Because something I teach about in the political communication seminars I do is that judgment and justification are completely different processes in the brain. How we form our judgments does not follow how we justify them after they've been formed.
Yeah.
Right? And we justify them using principles and logic and facts. But we form judgments for many different reasons. Group identity reasons, say subcultural reasons.
See, Robin, I can't be you. I can't think like that. I just.
Well, it's just an observation.
No, it stems of a kind of cynicism. I'm just personally incapable.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. I just look at people and I read books and I go, aren't people interesting?
Yeah.
And they are interesting.
Yeah.
And this is why people can sell things. People sell things because they know how people's minds work.
Yeah.
Right? But that doesn't make me. See, I don't have a negative reaction to that, because just like I can't have a negative reaction to E = MC squared. It's just the way things are, right? So we can do good or evil in the context of all of this,
right? And
all of this includes human nature.
Yeah.
I guess
So I would like to see an anarchism that's heavily informed by your sophistication on these matters.
Oh, this is awesome common ground.
No, see
now.
You
see
what I mean?
Get to there. Let's do it. So there you have it. Jeffrey Tucker is more scared than he's been in his life as he watches the rise of fascism that might trump everything that we hold dear in the land of the free and the home of the brave. So I want to talk about how it's come to this, what we need to do about it, what it means. So that's what I'm going to monologue about in this show. And one of the reasons I decided that this is worth a monologue is that I read on Lou Rockwell's site just a few days ago that Walter Block, that bastion of, one might say, old school academic American libertarianism, is starting a group called Libertarians for Trump. Now that to me is like a group, turkeys for Christmas, or turkeys for Thanksgiving, I guess, since I'm in America now. Or I don't know, Jews for Nazism. I mean, it's absurd to me. Now, obviously, Walter Block is not a stupid guy, and you go and read the article. It's up there on Lou Rockwell's site. But wow, this is like some kind of, we talk about regulatory capture. This is kind of like, what is this? Cultural capture? Intellectual capture? It's absolutely bizarre. And it's an very extreme, perhaps one of the most extreme manifestations I've seen ever of this truth that I mentioned there with Jeffrey, that we retrofit our political views, our justifications, to judgments that we form for other reasons. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. So we're talking about some important things today on Blue Republican Radio. And they center around this important fact that we think that we come to conclusions for the reasons that we give when we are asked to justify those conclusions. And indeed, in our conscious minds, we truly believe that our reasons for our conclusions are our reasons for our conclusions. But when it comes to politics, it is rarely the case. When we judge a policy position, a political assertion, 80% of that judgment, for most people, most of the time, is actually a judgment about the person making it, rather than the content of the assertion. And we may favorably look upon or disfavorably look upon the person making an assertion for a number of reasons. When it comes to politics, a lot of those reasons are kind of tribal. They're group identity reasons. And this is why, for example, that people often say, why do those Southerners vote against their interest? Those poor Southerners, they vote Republican, and yet more welfare goes to the South than any other part of the country, so surely they should be voting Democrat because then their welfare would be safer, etc., etc. Something a little patronizing about that, but it's a reasonable argument. It kind of makes sense. And the answer is broadly that people don't vote in their self-interest, except in as much as their self-interest concerns their standing within the group, their participation within the group with which they identify. And it's really important to know this other thing that I talk about a lot when I give my political communication seminars, which is, at some level, all politics are the politics of identity. Those folks who are getting excited in those Trump rallies are identifying with him. And so you hear the fact that you hear about how he says what he means, and in some important way, he does. They like that he doesn't care about the reaction he's going to get. They like that he's being un-PC. Actually, I like all those things too. I don't like the fact that he's a megalomaniac. That puts me off his Trump's version of truth-telling, if we can call it that, of being sincere and authentic. But those things are, good qualities that most people are well disposed to. Now, there are a number of reasons why one might respond more positively to those things than one responds negatively to other things, or more positively to those things than other people may respond positively to those things, right? People feel alienated by the political process, by the lack of political choice they have, by the lack of cultural choice they have, right? Now, this speaks to the fact that the GOP has made Trump. Let's be absolutely clear. They have made a monster, and they don't like what they've made. Now, I guess, the GOP establishment would completely deny that. But it's clearly the case. It's clearly the case that the Republican Party has for many years courted a slightly not even slightly in some cases, a rather aggressive base an authoritarian base, a let's go bomb them abroad base, a scared base, it doesn't follow that obviously all people with those dispositions are going to be Republican. But it certainly is the case that the Republicans have targeted them, have nurtured that kind of discontent. But they went off and they didn't speak to it explicitly, right? They kind of sublimated it. They took the votes and then didn't do what they said they would do. I mean, the Republican Party has been talking about various versions of shrinking the government and protecting rights and getting the government out of our lives, of keeping us safe, all of these kind of things that conservatives go for, but they haven't delivered. And they've been wrong-footing the voters. I mean, the voters vote for them, but has the Republican Party really delivered for Republican voters, the grassroots Republicans, what it is that those grassroots voters want? I wouldn't say so. So now here comes someone who calls them out and says he's going to do exactly what those folks actually want done. And damn the torpedoes. Forget about the consequences. Right? Basically, he's telling everyone, I'm one of you. I'm one of you. And so, from his mouth, statements that if Obama made them would be rejected out of hand by Trump's audiences are loved, right? Because those audiences see themselves reflected in Donald Trump, the man on the stage. He talks to them irreverently, like they like to talk. There's nothing wrong with the irreverence. The irreverence itself is actually, I like irreverence. Obviously, it's the content that's dangerous, but it's not the content so much that people are responding to, even though that's what they think they're responding to. Does that make sense? So when, for example, Ted Cruz talks about securing the border, the content's about securing the border. Donald Trump talks about securing the border. Donald Trump talks about it in a different way. It's the way he's talking that's turning people on. Not only is he a product of the Republican Party, who've made this monster by courting the kind of components of personality in their base that they have been courting for so long. The left have also made Donald Trump. The establishment left. We do have a PC problem here. There are things that regular folks can't talk about without being looked down on. People do feel that. Many do. And so, from the left, from the right, from the Republicans, from the Democrats, a large minority of America feels that there's no one who's like them, no one in power who is like them. I don't mean who shares their beliefs necessarily, but with whom they can identify. Now, obviously, identifying with someone is cultural and psychological, right? Because what I mean by that is, I know what it must feel like to be you, or I know what it must feel like to be him or to be her. I can trust where that guy's coming from. Doesn't mean I agree. I might think I'm more likely to agree because I trust where the guy's coming from. But it's not the policies that lead me to the political allegiance. It's the political allegiance that leads me to the policies when stated by the person or the group to which I have that allegiance. So what causes me to have political allegiance? That guy's one of us. And Trump is one of those people, Now, why is Trump dangerous? Because he wants to take down our civil rights. He wants to, as Jeffrey Tucker was saying in that little clip that I played, he wants to, throw out free speech. He is literally inciting violence by telling his audiences that if they punch a protester, he will pay the legal fees. And obviously he's an egomaniac. And the last person I want to have a thumb on, the nuclear button, for example, is an egomaniac. Which is why, by the way, the whole Walter Block and the Libertarians for Trump is, also so absurd. Let's just be clear. Walter Block's argument for Trump, why Trump is someone that Libertarians should support, is based, it seems, purely on the fact that he's less likely to take us into war than Hillary Clinton. Well, yeah, but that may be true. I mean, I don't know that it's true, but yeah, I can see why he would say that. But if the price of that is a takedown of civil rights even faster than Obama's been taking them down, and a crony corporatist protectionism, which is even worse than we saw under Bush or Obama, then you can't be a libertarian for Trump, because he's not the lesser of two goods.
Trust. For nearly 4 decades, that is the reputation Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has forged with their customers. Now, with their full e-commerce website, rrbi.co, it's easier than ever to buy or sell precious metals via Bitcoin or major credit card. Visit them online at rrbi.co or call 800-874-9760 to speak with an experienced professional today. Roberts & Roberts, when you're serious about precious metals.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
The War State by Michael Swanson is a must-read for anyone interested in the critical 20 years after World War II, when the United States morphed from a constitutional republic to a global imperial superpower. Get The War State by Michael Swanson from Amazon.com today.
So, yeah, Donald Trump. In Britain, recently, there was a general election, right? A year or so ago, I think. And I've mentioned UKIP a lot on this show. I need to mention them again. The politics of UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, are closer to the politics of the Conservative Party in England, which is more like the American Republicans, than they are to the Labour Party in England, which is more like the more like the American Democrats. So the pundits all thought that the rise of UKIP, which is a third party, obviously, in Britain, a small L kind of libertarian party, the pundits thought that that UKIP would take votes from the Conservatives because, as I say, UKIP policies are closer to the Conservative policies than to the Labour policies. And in the South, where the Conservatives are strongest in England, UKIP did take votes from the Conservatives. But in the North, where the Labour Party is strongest in England, UKIP took votes not from the Conservatives, but from the Labour Party. Even though the politics are so different, the politics of the Labour Party and UKIP are so different. Why? Well, it's very easy to understand why. If you realise that, again, people don't form political allegiances because they agree with political ideas. They agree with political ideas because those ideas come from people or groups with whom they culturally or psychologically identify. So in the North, in England, do you remember, I don't know if you guys follow this bit of English politics, but the most famous English politician in America, I think, is Nigel Farage, right? Nigel Farage, who's the leader of UKIP, is always seen with a pint of beer and a cigarette. He's just, he looks like a working class guy who likes the same things that all of those Labour voting working class folks up in the north of England like. His politics are completely different, but when those Labour voters see Nigel Farage, they see a man with whom they can identify for cultural reasons. And so many of them switched allegiances, switched political allegiances. You can't explain it if you think that one's political allegiance is about the ideas to which you are committed. Now, this speaks to what Jeffrey Tucker, in the clip I played, said he was having trouble understanding. Why would libertarians get sucked into the Donald Trump vortex? Because a lot of libertarians feel comfortable with an anti-establishment experience, right? They feel they are anti-establishment. They like to reject norms. They have a deep-seated skepticism of what is given. That's something I share, actually. A few years ago, you could be anti-establishment by being a libertarian. You could be anti a perceived progressive establishment, the progressive media, the intellectual elites, by being a Republican, right? Now, whatever experience you were enjoying by being an anti-establishment person in your politics, you can get in spades by becoming a Donald Trump supporter. Obviously, I'm not saying that all Republicans were in it for that anti-establishment kick, for that reactionary kick, or all libertarians were. I'm just saying that within any group of people who espouse a particular set of political ideas, there are various cultural and psychological affinities with the perceived moral authorities, those people with perceived moral authority who are associated with those ideas or who espouse those ideas. So in this case, you have a large fraction of Republicans who have a cultural and psychological affinity with Donald Trump. The cultural affinity being the kind of reactionary thing, the psychological affinity being the authoritarian thing, right? So these are people who would have supported Republicans in the past, who would be complaining about government and how government wants to interfere in your life and take away your rights. And now, because Trump is who he is, right? And they're getting high on his irreverence and his reactionariness and his anti-establishmentness and his authenticity, indeed, right? Now, those same people, without any cognitive dissonance, actually, no felt cognitive dissonance, are perfectly happy to cheer this guy when he says, the problem is people are scared of hurting other people. Trump actually said that in the last few days, that part of the problem in our politics is that people no longer want to hurt other people, right? Trump wants to, get into your iPhones and let the government in there. He wants to, take down the First Amendment, right? I mean, the freedom of speech of the press. He's spoken out against that, and he gets all these cheers by the same people who before were voting for politicians who were saying, those Democrats, they don't care about the Constitution, vote for me, I care about the Constitution, right? There's no intellectual consistency, but there is psychological consistency. There is cultural consistency. So, my friends in the liberty movement, just like Trump gets all of this support by reflecting back to people, not just what they believe, because that, as we've seen, changes very easily, but reflecting back to people who they are. Now, Trump reflects back to people's baser nature. But this also works reflecting back to folks their higher nature. Maybe that's a little harder. It is, though, by the way. Why Ron Paul had such an impact on so many of us, right? He reflected back something in many of us that was our higher nature. It's harder to do. But even as he has left the political stage, we meet thousands of people who were millions of people, are out there now, whose lives have been changed by Ron Paul, by the connection that Ron Paul made with them, not as a politician. Right? That's the whole thing about Ron Paul. We all know it. He didn't come off as a politician. He wasn't meeting us just with ideas. He met us in his humility, in his authenticity. It had a very different flavor from Donald Trump's. But we responded to the same thing fundamentally, right? Differently dressed up, differently manifest, but that same thing. That psychological, that cultural connection. Now, obviously, I'm not poo-pooing those libertarian ideas that Ron Paul got many people to explore and to be committed to. I'm not saying that all intellectual commitment to political philosophies is meaningless and fickle. No, I'm not saying that is the case for all of us. But it is the case for most people most of the time. As I've said on this show, Donald is doing well with lots of people because he's reflecting back to people who they feel they are, both culturally and psychologically. And on the other side of the political or end of the political spectrum, Bernie Sanders is doing it. And, you know, I did interview Tucker on this show not that long ago, and I asked him who's more dangerous, the brown shirts or the red shirts, i.e. Trump's fascists or Sanders' socialists. And spoiler alert, if you're going to go and listen to that interview, but Tucker said the Trump's brown shirts are more dangerous than Sanders' red shirts. And I think I agree with him. And I think I agree with him for just the reason that he, Jeffrey Tucker, espoused in the earlier interview. So go check it out. So what I want the liberty movement to get educated in is this fact. We have to connect with people by conveying a feeling that they have felt themselves, right? How unsophisticated is Donald Trump's political message? I mean, it's inconsistent, it's anti-liberty, it's anti the very founding principles of America. I mean, it clearly is by any standard. I mean, it doesn't even bear any analysis, it's all so obvious. And yet, a lot of his supporters are the same people who well, they say they want to make America great again, right? But it's, you know, if America was great for all of those values that made America, you know, the values of liberty and independence, then obviously what Trump is selling is a different kind of greatness or a different America, right? But as I say, most of his supporters aren't feeling the dissonance. So, my friends, remember, check out Nigel Farage. Get online and just see how he's portrayed with his pint of beer and his cigarette in hand. And know that he's winning votes because people think that they know what it feels like to be a guy who likes a pint of beer and a cigarette. Right? That's how you get votes. Now, the thing about Trump is there's massive disaffection. There's massive disaffection in terms of both content and political process. The immigration thing is such a good example. It's a great example. I say often, and I teach it in my seminars, that if you want to unite people politically, you have to speak to the immediately felt injustice, something that's so just simply on the face of it unfair, that you need no political ideology to feel the unfairness about. The situation on our southern border is such a thing. I'm not saying that everybody's going to agree with this, but you don't need a political ideology to see that if people break a law, whether it's a criminal or a civil, and they get things that other folks who are law-abiding don't get, that there's something inherently unfair there. Now, you don't need a political ideology to feel that there's something wrong in that. Sometimes there are big unfairnesses that last a long time, like the situation that we have in America with respect to immigration. And sometimes those unfairnesses are not spoken to by any part of the mainstream political establishment, because no part of the mainstream political establishment can solve the problem. And here, the immigration thing, perfect example, the Democrats and the Republicans can't actually solve the problem. So there's a large disaffected a bunch of disaffected Americans who go, well, this isn't fair. Nobody else is speaking to this. So when somebody comes along and just says to them what they're feeling about something that's important and, upsets them at a level of basic human justice, they immediately turn towards that person. The person who calls out the problem, in this case Donald Trump, is the person to whom those who see the problem the same way will immediately turn for the solution to the problem. And so, when Donald Trump says, just, build that 10-foot wall, right? The people who think that Donald Trump is the only person that's really called the problem by its name, those people go first to his solution. And because he called the problem, they naturally believe that whether the solution's a good one or a bad one, at least he's going to implement that solution, right? Why? Because he cared enough to call out the problem in the first place. So the subconscious message there is, to him this is so important, so he will apply his effort to get this done. In contrast to the continued lack of success on the immigration issue that we've seen from both Republicans and Democrats. So Trump appeals in that way. But Trump also appeals in the fact that our political process is kind of premised now on not being straight with the voters. Even, people who aren't pundits know that the system doesn't really involve them, right? That the decisions getting made on Capitol Hill, in the White House, are basically hidden from them. That the politicians are consistently not saying it like it is. So you come and you say it like it is. And it's shocking what people will agree with, because they're agreeing with the fact that you're saying it like it is, not with the thing that you are saying. And because we don't appreciate that, because we don't get why this is so effective, why what Trump is doing is so effective, we get a situation that causes Jeffrey Tucker to say that he's more scared now than he's ever been. And we should be scared. Because he is right. This is how tyranny, like real tyranny, comes to a nation. We do have to know all of this and then go back to our principles. I've said that we don't come to our political allegiances based on actual thought out principles, and that is true for most of the people most of the time, but we must do so. We must use the kind of techniques that Trump is using, this authenticity, this connection with people where they are, to espouse the principles that we should be espousing of liberty, the principles on which this country is based. The mechanisms of Trump can be used for good as well as evil, but we can't ignore the mechanisms, and we can't be the only people not using them. Now, some of you might be thinking that's all very well, Robin, but it's gobbledygook because, the kind of people that Trump is attracting just aren't going to be interested in, or maybe even don't have the mental capacity to understand liberty, let's say, like we do. Well, you'd be wrong, I'm afraid. They might appear not to, but that's because we are not putting in the kind of capsule that Trump is using, our philosophy. You can't teach somebody an entire political philosophy unless they're really interested in learning a political philosophy. Trump is effective because he's boiled it all down to make America great again. I mean, there's nothing to it. But that is the capsule. For 40 years, we've had a libertarian party that's been trying to treat a philosophy and has got nowhere. And frankly, I'm bored of their failure. I'm bored of the fact that they're not bored of failing. We should try something more along the lines of make America free again. How about that? Just make America free again. We don't have to talk about the monetary system, right? We don't have to go into the details of foreign policy. Let's just get people excited about something that maybe make America free again means a lot of different things to a lot of people, just as make America great again means a lot of different things to a lot of people, or maybe it means nothing to anyone, if you look at it in another way. But the fact that it works tells you it's not just about the ideas. It's not even mostly about the ideas. It's about the experience that those people in those Donald Trump rallies are having. What is the experience they're having? They're fired up. They're excited. They feel possibility. They feel change. The liberty movement has to give people that feeling. You don't give them that feeling by giving them a philosophy lesson, right? You give most people that feeling by doing what Trump does or doing what Sanders does, by speaking to the injustice, by having that passion. Now, I know we're passionate for liberty. We are. But we don't lead with the passion. Lead with the passion. We've got to stop just complaining about how our liberties have been taken down and start painting the positive picture of what everybody, all Americans, can do if we restore liberty to this country. Let's think about what will be possible in America and actually paint that picture.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.